System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' inner city left.
Inner City Left. I am Amin TMK alongside with Emoja Lil Tanky Sumler. I'm excited to talk to you today, bro. How are you doing?
Man, the news keep happening.
Let's jump right into it, shall we? Um, we have been discussing the conflict in Russia and Ukraine now for some time. We have been warning about escalatory rhetoric coming from Russia, as well as the actual escalation of war from the West. I want to just talk a little bit about Dmitry Medvedev. Last week, he talked about tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine.
Just for the listeners and the watchers, can you say what Dmitry Medvedev's position is in Russia?
He is the senior Russian security official.
Right, and spent some time as the president of Russia back in the 2000s. So this is not a man that is not connected with that. Back to your quote, good sir.
Yeah, former Russian president now is a so yeah, I mean definitely tapped in. Talked about this. We have been you had already mentioned last week you were I don't know if this is breaking news, tanky breaking news I like to call it, but how you were talking about damage being done to the nuclear detection apparatus in Russia by the Ukrainians. What does this mean? What is your reaction to these escalatory
So it
talks?
continues to happen, right? They're trying to degrade Russia's missile defense all throughout the line of combat and acting like this is something related to the Ukraine conflict. This is something totally different. We've entered a totally different era. And this is how you're getting these statements from guys like Lavrov and Medvedev and Putin, right? That they're asking, does the West want nuclear war? Like not just war, but nuclear war, right? Because when you hit the the nuclear early launch detection radar, right? And now you have Ukraine.
That was hit last week. I mean, think about how
two different
mind
ones.
blowing.
Two
Twice.
different ones. This event happened twice, but it was two different radars. They only have 10.
Wow.
They only right. So like there are 10 early nuclear
So 20%. They hit 20%.
Yeah, right. So it's an incredibly provocative act. And then you have the Ukrainian officials admitting that American weapons have been used, the HIMARS system, in the Belgorod area of Russia, which is considered old Russia. This is an area that was definitely Russia before the 2022 special military operation, before the 2014 Maidan coup, right? This is an area that is internationally respected as Russia, right? It's not quote unquote in a combat zone. And Ukrainians have utilized American weapon systems, right, against S-300 and S-400 surface-to-air SAM sites. So again, it's missile defense, right? You have Ukrainians utilizing weapons in Russia proper that are made to help Russia better defend itself against a preemptive nuclear strike, right? So, like, with these things happening and the continuation of these talks about F-16s, which are normally utilized to deliver nuclear weapons, right? So, like, Russia's saying, if it's going to be this is why they've done their tactical exercises. You have more than one retired American colonel even talking about, I don't understand if the political elite understand how dangerous a military posture this is. Colonel Wilkinson has made this comment. Colonel McGregor has made this comment. So this is two different people that came up in the American military apparatus and achieved extremely high levels of this is where you're at with your career. With a colonel, all that's left is a general, being a general. So like, these are not like, just guys that are like freestyling. These are guys that have spent their career studying these things, that are mesmerized and perplexed by the posture that NATO and, let's be honest, the directors, the puppets pulling the strings, the American presidency, right? Because they're trying to understand how far are the Americans willing to go, and the Russians are wondering the same thing.
It seems as if, I don't want to say it seems as if, it is that the West is dead set on forcing the Russians to commit to a larger conflict. Sergei Lavrov, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs, he was in Congo. And he also said, as for the French instructors, as we know, the French Foreign Legion or whoever, they're French troops in Ukraine. As for French instructors, I think they are already on Ukraine territory. Regardless of their status, military officials or mercenaries represent a legitimate target for our armed forces. It seems like not only is the United States trying to escalate this, but also France and also in the larger aspect, Europe. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is coordination within NATO, right? So you have the French who have already given permission for the Ukrainians to use their missiles inside of old Russia. You have the British that have done so, right? And you have Americans now that have done so in a marginally more limited capacity, right? They're like, oh, things that are close to the battlefield. But let's be honest, once you're given that order, once you're given that permission, it starts to get real nebulous. What is the entire area of Russia is the battlefield, right? So like that's what you get when you have someone that's messianic like Zelensky, who feels like Russia must be defeated at all costs, in spite of everything that we're seeing. When you see French soldiers on the ground nominally listed as instructors, right? We've seen this before. Russia, and this is why, again, Russia's nuclear posture is so advanced right now. Why they're so close to this happening. The fact of the matter is, this is the lie that the West does often. Think about how many years you had SEALs in Vietnam posing as military instructors, right? If you're on and again, ask yourself as an American, go back to the Civil War. How would the North have responded if, say, the French were advisors to the Confederacy on the battlefield, right? If the British were advisors, right? You would have still initiated hostilities because you were providing material support to my enemy, right? In a state of war. So again, these are rhetorical word games. And it seems like Russia's just out of patience for like playing these games. This is why the West has this reputation for being duplicitous, right? Like they say one thing, but they mean another. You see the same thing in China right now, where Xi and all of the people that are doing, that foreign policy outreach, when they deal with the Americans, they don't believe them. They're like, put this in writing. Because again, we have a one China principle where the United States government acknowledges there's only one China, and that China is the People's Republic of China. It's right, not the Republic of China, which is Taipei, right, which is a province of China. So but at the same time, they're still funding these people and giving them weapons of war in ways that the Americans would never tolerate.
And also implementing coups. There is foreign influence. We know that there was a coup in Ukraine, and that led to Zelensky's rise. And you can see now the reason why he must have been implemented, because this war was being planned. Everyone knew. I mean, from early as 2014, I started hearing, remember the attacks on Crimea and Crimea voting to basically, be a part of Russia.
Right. I mean, everything about what happened in 2014 and the inevitable rise of Zelensky is obvious, right? This is a person who was a comedian who was not very well known, put into this television show where he got to be he was a high school principal, and he was going to fix, he becomes the president of Ukraine, and he's going to fix it and stop all the corruption and stop the war with Russia, right? I mean, this is like watching Martin Sheen play the president, on West Wing, and then voting him into the presidency, right? So everything about that was constructed to make him look like a person that people could sympathize with, someone that they could get behind. But the reality is, we're here now in June 2024, and Putin, whatever you say about his election, went through an election process where we're dealing with a Zelensky that has no longer any constitutional power because his presidency term has ran out. It ran out in May. So this is a president that doesn't even literally have any real constitutional mandate, right? Certainly not a mandate of the people because the people never got their say.
We hear about the lack of the democratic process or the legitimacy of the Russian elections. My question is, if they're so easy to rig, why doesn't Ukraine just do it?
Why doesn't Ukraine do it? Right?
Yeah.
No, 100%. And these things continue to be, right? So, like right now, Zelensky's number one thing is he's jet setting all around the world. He just came back from the Shangri-La conference, which why even was he there? I mean, Ukraine is certainly not an Asian nation. It's weird enough when the Americans are there, but like Ukraine. And he goes there and he ostracizes Chairman Xi, for saying they're trying to sabotage my peace talks with Russia, right? But let's talk about what those peace talks are. They're coming up in a week or two. They're in Switzerland, ostensibly supposed to be a neutral European place, except for when you look at they're out there enacting these sanctions against Russia, which is hardly a neutral act, right? They're part of the seizure of Russian capital, which is hardly a neutral act, right? Having a peace conference with a person who's not legally the president, and Russia's not even invited. And the whole point of it is, well, the beginning of this process is Russia will give up all the lands they won in the special military operation. And that's the beginning of the talk. Like, of course, no one's going to go to that.
That's a non-starter.
That's a no.
There's like 12 non-starters in these. It goes back sort of, and I don't want to look. It's like we always talk about. This is connected. This is a similar thing with Netanyahu's government and the hostages. They don't want the hostages back, so they have to play this rhetoric like they do. But really, in fact, it can't be done. At least in the way that they negotiate. And when I have a hostage, I trade it in for another hostage or some sort of financial benefit or some sort of benefit. You don't just give back hostages. That's not how it works. But the United States is just hell bent on taking whatever their rhetoric is amongst themselves and turning it into real life, real time implications. And we see that what they want to do is simply impossible.
It's hard not to look at a real politic point of view on this, if I may, real quick. Netanyahu says that he's going to work on this deal with Biden. Biden puts out this plan like, oh, well, because he's not getting good information or he's not remembering, who knows at this point, or he just doesn't care, right? No one's told this man, or he doesn't remember, or it's irrelevant to him that Hamas has already agreed to a peace deal that was brokered by his CIA and William Burr, the commander, the president of Egypt, and the leader of Qatar. Like they put this deal together, and
Hamas won't take it. Hamas won't take it. Several officials. We listened to Kirby, as we name him, the Marlboro Man. But Kirby was on there, and he was like, I don't care what they say in the public. What they're saying us behind closed doors is different. So you're telling me that the public officials are rejecting this deal, but behind closed doors, they're saying they're willing to accept it. And even though Hamas has already accepted it, it's not being accepted because Hamas is holding it up. The rhetoric doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, in every interview, you have Netanyahu saying, I'm not going to do anything that means the war stops. But then we don't have anything to talk about.
What are we talking about? Yeah.
We're talking about stopping the war, right?
And that's the same thing that's happening at this stupid peace conference. There is no peace to be had. They're asking for Crimea. For God's sakes, the Crimea has already done voted. It's been a decade plus, damn near.
There was a Crimean war. Who fought it? It wasn't Ukraine and Britain. It was Russia and Britain. So that should tell you how long Crimea has been part of the strategic interest of Russia, how long it's been part of Russia, right, from a cultural point of view, and what they're willing to go to war. If they were willing to go to war with Britain to keep Crimea, I guarantee you they're okay with going to war with Ukraine, right? I mean, yeah,
They're just, I think in general, people are just having a problem, or at least the public is having a problem with accepting that this reason this special military operation was enacted was because the Russian speaking population of Crimea and the Donbass and Luhansk was being shelled. It was being, we were mentioning sort of the apartheid state that is in Palestine. They were also under a very different second class citizen sort of vibe. And
It's
Russia is like, we don't want this for our citizens.
it's always important to talk about. This is another one of those great hypocrisies of the West. They're all about nations declaring independence, right? They want Taiwan to declare independence, even if it breaks the world. But let's be honest, the Luhansk and the Donetsk areas declared independence from Ukraine. And before they even became part of the Russian Federation, they saw themselves as independent nations for 8 years, right? And so, like, this is part of that great hypocrisy because, again, the Russians didn't even want to annex Donetsk or Luhansk for until the beginning of this special military operation. They were all listed just like Transnistria, areas that have declared independence but aren't quite recognized by the entire world, right? So yeah, I mean, all of those stories are destroyed when you just look at the abject material conditions of the reality that Russia didn't even annex Donetsk or Luhansk until after the special military operation began.
And they still held a vote.
But they still held a vote.
Again, if it's so easy to rig the election, why aren't the Ukrainians doing it?
Yeah, I mean, why didn't they all vote to go back to Ukraine? I mean, like these are votes that are happening. I mean, you can continue to disparage this process, but you have to acknowledge the process is existing, right? What part of Ukraine is under more war than Donetsk and Luhansk, and yet they can have elections there? The rest of Ukraine cannot. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And if America was so gung ho about independence movements, they could start at home here with Puerto Rico. Let them hold a vote. Let's say if they want to truly be a part of the United States, or make them a state.
Ask Hawaii. I guarantee you, Hawaii would vote for independence immediately.
If they're so about it. Since we're talking about, America, of course, obviously, I wanted to pivot a little bit if I can. Joey B, President Joe Biden, not my president, yesterday rolled out migration order that aims to shut down asylum requests at the U.S.-Mexican border if illegal crossings average 2,500 per day. I want to read a tweet by Joe Biden. This is during his election campaign 2020 against Donald J. Trump. We must take urgent action to end Donald Trump's draconian immigration policies. In my first 100 days, we will end this inhumane asylum policy. The ACLU said the Biden administration just announced the executive order will severely restrict people's to legal right and seek asylum, putting tens of thousands of lives at risk. What are your thoughts on this?
What this reminds me of is the 80s, right? With Ronald Reagan and the whole Iran-Contra scandal where drugs are illegal and we're using the DEA to root out everything about these bad drugs all around Central America. Meanwhile, there are other organizations within the federal government that are working with forces that are selling drugs to fund their weapons procurement, right? The border crossing situation is absolutely the same thing. You have a Department of Homeland Security, and you have, Customs and INS, right? You have Border Patrol. All of these guys are dedicated to protecting the integrity of the United States. Meanwhile, you have the State Department doing things that work to create this problem, right? Like, let's acknowledge that unlike what most people think, most Americans think it's Mexicans crossing the border. That's not true. The largest demographic of people crossing the southern border are Venezuelans, which have been directly affected by the United States keeping economic blockade on Venezuela for the past, since Hugo Chavez, almost 20 years, simply because they nationalized their oil, which would be something that would make Venezuela it would increase the standard of living. More importantly, it damages American corporations' energy access, right? It possibly threatens that. And so, because of that, for the past 20 years, Venezuela has been under an economic blockade, whereas people are just like, I need to leave the country. Where can I go? The land of opportunity, the United States, right? You don't need a border. You don't need a border wall. What you need is to leave other countries alone so that those countries can develop and make an area that people don't want to leave or aren't forced to leave from, right? This is the Americans, once again, wanting it both ways. And this is, so when you have Biden saying these kind of things, all I see it as is really him returning to his early segregationist roots. This is a person who is essentially doing everything he can to court the Nikki Haley vote, right? And those are the kind of POCs he wants to impress. POCs that have lost themselves into this concept of America in such a way so that there is no more homeland. There is only ever this great Pax Americana, right? And this is what Joe Biden represents. This is what he's always represented, right? Going back to when he was a segregationist, an open segregationist in the 70s. So to hear him talk this language, it doesn't really surprise me at all. It does shock me, though, because the Democrats are so great at being at the least virtue signaling of how wonderful they are as a party, right? I mean, and the reality is Trump did this exact same thing, and the Democrats stopped the government and essentially went to the Supreme Court to get court in action to keep these things from happening. And you won't see any of that now that it's Joe Biden.
Yeah, we saw Representative Ocasio-Cortez in an all-white outfit with heels on the caged fence, and she was crying. And there was a big photo op there, and it was like hashtag kids in cages, and it was this enormous thing. And now that it seems that a Democratic president is involved, I was reading a tweet. They were saying all the the stuff you see on the lawn, the Ukraine flags, and no one is illegal. No one is illegal. Yeah, those are coming off the lawns right now because we have a Democratic president who's, yeah.
And the reason why they think this is going to work, right, is because there is a subsection of the American population that will not vote for a felon. And so what have you seen, right? You've seen the Democrats right back out weaponizing the word felon, all again. And what's so sad about this, as I'm wearing my en masse incarceration shirt, right, is this is, again, a wonderful opportunity to really look at the ways where maybe the American justice system can be reimagined, right? Now, once again, we have a system where a man who has falsified economic records is being punished more than a man that is literally helping to enable and supply a genocide, right? So, like, it shows, again, what are the things that are really dangerous in America. Oh, this guy lied about the money. We got to do something about that. But this guy is sold weapons. That's what he did. He didn't kill anybody. He helped the American GDP by making sure that American corporations would be able to sell these munitions and keep Q1 earnings, right? I mean, that's America.
Yeah. It goes to show, I mean, we say this all the time, and I think it's important just to keep repeating it. It was bad then, and it's way worse now. We see the erosion of sort of our freedoms and things of that nature. We always freak in. We watch a lot of different videos, and we saw that former UN weapon inspector Scott Ritter's passport was taken as he was
any crime, right? Just literally told.
Just 3 State Department guys come up to him and say, "Give me your passport." Again, and this is when we hear of things like freedom of speech. It's just a silly thing to talk about in the United States because. We certainly, our Instagram page has been flagged several times for information that we are almost, even the little notes, the community note that they write, it's still not really even addressing the photos. So we see this happening on social media. We're going to have a conversation with Matt Cedillo about, the American oligarchy. And we know that Facebook and, they have all these companies and all these social medias are mining your metadata in a way that they understand you better than them. We see what's happening to Julian Assange, and hopefully one day he will be free, but that day is not now. And I don't know if it'll ever happen. So we see this like constant fight and war on journalism during a Democratic presidency. And yeah, I think it's just it's a dangerous place to be out there, literally just saying, hey, I think maybe we should he says draconian policies. This is a draconian policy, man.
Well, it was then, but it's not now because he needs to do it. Understand, it's really important that he shows conservatives that he's a conservative too, right? And this doubles down on that whole language of illegal at the State of the Union, right? All of these people that said they were going to push Biden to the left have been dragged to the right. And here they still are,
he was
trying to
putting on for
shame to hustle up votes. Like it doesn't work.
He was trying to put on for Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the most conservative, politicians. Yeah, she doesn't like you, bro. Move on, bro. Yeah, great show. Anything else you want to discuss on before I move on here? Oh, I did want to mention one other thing too, because you were talking. Remember, we were also talking about Matt when he was discussing Cuba and Mexico and Cuba's solidarity with each other, and everyone sort of understands and has this awareness that these sanctions are crippling these nations. Not to mention, I think Central America has been destabilized and or has capitalism sort of instilled within their organizations. We talk
and
about, I think,
bears direct responsibility for the instability in Central and South America. So it's the pinnacle of hypocrisy then to blame humans that are migrating to conditions that they see as more favorable for their life when you destroy their nations. If you don't want them to come here, don't interfere with their countries and their processes and
that's what President AMLO was saying, or former president, or I guess he's president for a little bit longer, but
right.
You have to be able to compensate people for the destruction of their nation, whether it's through an economic hit job, literal coups, or the CIA or the DEA being involved in your stuff. We've been watching Snowfall, so I think all this goes great with the first couple of seasons of Snowfall. We're big fans. So anyway, innercityleft.com. We are on YouTube, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Player FM, the places where you find podcasts. You can always hit us up on our Patreon, patreon.com/innercityleft.
Yo, all of our new Patreons, thank you so much. We see you. We appreciate you. You make this work so much easier to implement.
So let's give them a shout out, shall we? Much love to Robbie, Paula, Lissa, Lauren, Suzette, and Dennis. Hey, if you got something cool. If not, like and subscribe. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you're feeling. What your thoughts are on what we're talking about, and if you have any suggestions for content. Anything else before we slide out of here? Tanky. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.